The sun, a deceptive orb of pale gold, had barely begun its ascent over the undulating Tennessee hills on that Saturday, the 21st of May, 1994. A light mist, a spectral breath of the nascent summer, clung to the lowest branches of ancient oak trees and kissed the dew-laden fescue grass in the sprawling backyard of the Miller residence. Inside, the quiet hum of an awakening home punctuated the pre-dawn stillness. The aroma of brewing coffee, a robust Colombian roast, began to seep from the kitchen, a comforting harbinger of the weekend for Sarah Miller, a woman whose life revolved around the meticulously ordered chaos of raising 4 young children. Her husband, David, a man of sturdy build and an even sturdier moral compass, was already out on the porch, a newspaper spread before him, the headlines of a world far removed from their bucolic existence barely registering as he savored the quiet solitude. In their world, a world bounded by the gentle curves of rural roads and the whispering secrets of sprawling fields, the greatest concerns were typically the rising price of feed for their small flock of chickens or the ongoing debate about the best fertilizer for Sarah's heirloom roses. No shadows of impending doom, no premonitions of shattering grief dared to intrude upon this tableau of quintessential American domesticity. Sarah, her auburn hair still tousled from sleep, moved with the practiced grace of a mother of 4, preparing breakfast, pancakes, a Saturday morning tradition that brought riotous joy to her brood. She hummed a forgotten tune, her thoughts drifting to the plans for the day, a trip to the nearby creek for fishing, perhaps a picnic beneath the ancient willow, and then later, a movie night, a rare indulgence that would see all 6 of them piled onto the worn, comfortable sofa in the living room. Her children, William, 7, a boy with eyes the color of the summer sky and an insatiable curiosity; Emily, 5, all pigtails and mischievous giggles; Thomas, 4, a quiet observer, always with a beloved worn teddy bear clutched in his hand; and little Lily, just 3, a whirlwind of dimpled smiles and boundless energy, were still nestled in the warm embrace of sleep, their rooms, each a testament to their budding personalities. Toy cars strewn across William's carpet, Emily's doll collection meticulously arranged on her dresser, Thomas's crayon drawings taped haphazardly to his wall, and Lily's crib surrounded by a menagerie of stuffed animals, were sanctuaries of innocence. The clock on the kitchen wall, a simple wooden piece carved with a pastoral scene, marked 6:45 a.m. The coffee was still warm, a testament to the early start of the Miller household. The air, crisp and fresh, hinted at the glorious warmth the day promised, a perfect day for children to explore the gentle wildness of their surroundings. This idyllic morning, however, was destined to become the precipice of an unimaginable tragedy, a turning point that would forever scar the landscape of their lives and cast a long, cold shadow over the quiet community of Willow Creek. The small town, with its single traffic light and a population that rarely swelled beyond 2,000 souls, prided itself on its neighborly spirit, its unlocked doors, and the comforting assumption of safety. Yet on this particular Saturday, an unseen malevolence lurked, poised to shatter that fragile illusion and plunge Willow Creek into an abyss of fear, suspicion, and an enduring, heartbreaking mystery. The children, oblivious to the grim fate awaiting them, stirred in their beds, their dreams still filled with the simple joys of childhood, unaware that the tapestry of their lives, woven with threads of laughter and sunshine, was about to be irrevocably torn. Sarah poured herself another cup of coffee, the steam warming her face, and smiled, thinking of the happy chaos that would soon erupt as her children descended upon the kitchen, their morning appetites ravenous, their spirits bright. The clock in the kitchen ticked steadily towards 7 o'clock, its rhythmic pulse a stark contrast to the sudden, jarring silence that would soon descend upon the Miller household, a silence far more deafening than any scream. William was the first to wake, his internal clock, honed by years of anticipation for Saturday morning cartoons and syrup-drenched pancakes, rarely failed him. He slipped from his bed, a nascent adventurer already plotting his day, and padded softly to his sister's room, rousing Emily and Lily with gentle nudges and whispered promises of chocolate chip pancakes. Thomas, ever the last to stir, eventually emerged, his beloved teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles, clutched tightly in his fist, his eyes still heavy with sleep. The 4 children, a procession of tousled hair and sleepy smiles, made their way to the kitchen, their soft footsteps on the wooden floorboards a prelude to the joyful cacophony that typically accompanied breakfast. Sarah greeted them with a warm smile, her hands deftly flipping pancakes on the griddle, the golden discs piling high on a platter. David joined them, folding his newspaper and offering a playful growl, pretending to be a hungry bear, which sent Lily into peals of delighted laughter. The scene was one of utter normalcy, a snapshot of familial bliss, utterly devoid of any hint of the darkness that was already drawing near, a silent predator stalking the edges of their innocent world. At precisely 8:15 a.m., after a breakfast filled with laughter, sticky fingers, and the clatter of cutlery, the children, fueled by sugar and youthful exuberance, burst out of the back door, intent on their morning adventures. William, the natural leader, declared a grand expedition to the woods bordering their property, a realm of imagined beasts and hidden treasures. Emily and Lily, their bright dresses fluttering behind them, followed with eager steps, while Thomas, ever cautious, trailed slightly behind, Mr. Snuggles still firmly in tow. Sarah watched them go, her heart swelling with the familiar ache of maternal love and pride. "Be back by noon for lunch," she called out, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze. "And stay out of the old well," David added, a half-serious warning about a long-disused, overgrown well shaft on the far edge of their property, a place forbidden to the children. The children, a quartet of vibrant life, waved their assurances, their voices a chorus of "We will!" fading as they disappeared into the verdant embrace of the woods. The sunlight filtering through the canopy of leaves dappled the forest floor, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow, a perfect playground for their imaginative games. Sarah and David spent the next few hours in companionable quiet, tending to their garden, making plans for their afternoon fishing trip. The hours slipped by, marked only by the languid drift of clouds across the sky and the melodic chirping of unseen birds. Noon arrived, heralded by the insistent chime of the old grandfather clock in the living room. Sarah straightened from pulling weeds, a faint frown creasing her brow. "Kids aren't back yet," she murmured, more to herself than to David. "They always come running when I call for lunch." David, wiping sweat from his brow, shrugged good-naturedly. "Probably found something fascinating. You know, William, give them another 15 minutes. 15 minutes turned into 30, then an hour. The pleasant hum of the day began to acquire a dissonant note, a subtle undercurrent of unease. Sarah called out from the back porch, her voice rising in pitch, a nascent tremor of fear beginning to take root in her chest. "William, Emily, Thomas, Lily!" Only the whisper of the wind through the trees answered her. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through the placid calm of her morning. David, sensing her growing anxiety, joined her, his own earlier nonchalance now replaced by a tightening in his gut. They walked to the edge of the woods, calling out, their voices growing more urgent with each unanswered cry. The silence that greeted them was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive, a thick blanket woven from unspoken fears. The woods, once a playground, now seemed to loom, dark and foreboding, its familiar paths transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. Sarah's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her mind, usually so clear and organized, raced with 1,000 possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Had they wandered too far? Had one of them fallen? The old well, the forbidden place, flashed into her mind, a sudden, chilling image. David, seeing the panic in her eyes, tried to reassure her, though his own voice was edged with a tremor. "They're probably just playing a trick, honey. You know how they are." But even as he spoke the words, he didn't believe them. The Miller children, their vibrant energy, their playful arguments, their infectious laughter, they were gone. The realization, a brutal, unyielding truth, settled over them like a shroud. The world, which just hours before had been filled with the ordinary wonders of a Saturday morning, had suddenly tilted on its axis, plunging them into a nightmare from which they would never truly awaken. The clock on the kitchen wall continued to tick, marking the passage of time with an indifference that felt cruel, each second deepening the chasm of their despair. The tranquil veneer of Willow Creek was about to be ripped away, revealing the raw, exposed nerves of a community grappling with the unthinkable. The date, May 21st, 1994, would forever be etched into the collective memory of the town, not as a day of warmth and sunshine, but as the day the Miller children vanished, swallowed whole by the seemingly innocuous woods, leaving behind only an echoing silence and a mother's escalating, unbearable fear. The search began with a quiet desperation, a localized, organic effort fueled by neighborly concern and the fading hope that the children had simply wandered off, lost track of time, or were perhaps hiding in an elaborate game. By 1:30 p.m., the initial calls had been made to the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department, a small two-man operation housed in a brick building next to the town's only diner. Sheriff Dale Jenkins, a man whose face was etched with the years of navigating the small-town dramas of misplaced livestock and petty theft, received the call from Sarah Miller, her voice trembling with a barely suppressed suppressed hysteria that instantly alerted him to the gravity of the situation. "My children, Sheriff, they're gone. They went into the woods this morning, and they haven't come back." Her words, punctuated by ragged breaths, sliced through the mundane routine of his Saturday afternoon. Deputy Earl Thomas, a younger man still learning the rhythms of rural law enforcement, was dispatched immediately to the Miller residence, while Sheriff Jenkins began making calls to local volunteers, mobilizing the network of community goodwill that was the backbone of Willow Creek. By 2 o'clock, a small contingent of neighbors, armed with flashlights and a grim determination, had gathered at the Miller's driveway. Their faces, usually open and friendly, were now clouded with worry. The woods, which had always been a source of childish adventure and natural beauty, suddenly loomed large, a silent, unyielding fortress of trees and undergrowth. David Miller, his face pale and drawn, tried to direct the impromptu search parties, his voice hoarse from shouting his children's names. Sarah, wrapped in a blanket, sat on the porch swing, her gaze fixed on the tree line, her mind replaying every moment of the morning, searching for a clue, a sign, a missed detail that could explain this terrifying void. The air grew heavier, not just with the humid promise of a summer afternoon, but with the suffocating weight of mounting dread. The first organized search efforts focused on the immediate vicinity of the Miller property, meticulously combing the paths the children were known to frequent, the creek where they often fished, and the perimeters of the old well, a place both dangerous and intriguing to young minds. But as the afternoon wore on, and the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, no trace of William, Emily, Thomas or Lily was found. No discarded toy, no footprint, no whispered echo of their laughter. The woods seemed to have swallowed them whole, leaving not a single crumb of evidence. The initial hope that they were merely lost began to erode, replaced by a colder, more sinister apprehension. By 6 p.m., with twilight gathering like a hungry beast, Sheriff Jenkins made the difficult decision to call in reinforcements from the state level. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, was notified, signaling a shift from a missing persons search to a potential abduction inquiry. Special Agent Mark Peterson, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for meticulousness and an unnerving ability to read a crime scene, was assigned to the case. He arrived in Willow Creek just after 9 p.m., the flashing lights of his unmarked sedan cutting through the deepening gloom, casting eerie shadows on the anxious faces gathered at the Miller farm. Peterson, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a perpetually rumpled suit, took in the scene with a practiced gaze. He spoke to Sheriff Jenkins, absorbing the limited details, then sought out Sarah and David Miller, his voice calm and empathetic, yet firm. "Tell me everything," he requested, his pen poised over a small notepad. Sarah, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from weeping, recounted the morning's events with heartbreaking precision, her memory sharpened by terror. David, his jaw tight, added details about the children's usual routines, their favorite hiding spots, their playful adventurousness. As they spoke, Peterson's mind began to construct a timeline, a mental map of probabilities and impossibilities. The lack of any trace, any sign of struggle, in an area so thoroughly searched, immediately raised a red flag. This wasn't a case of children simply getting lost. This was something far more insidious. The TBI initiated a full-scale search and rescue operation, bringing in dozens of trained personnel, K-9 units, and specialized equipment. The dense woods, the fields, the abandoned barns, even the nearby stretches of highway were meticulously scoured. The once quiet Miller home became the epicenter of a frantic, round-the-clock investigation, illuminated by floodlights that cast a harsh, artificial glare over the desperate activity. Helicopters with powerful searchlights sliced through the night sky, their rhythmic thud a somber soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. Local news crews, alerted by the unusual activity, began to converge on Willow Creek, their satellite trucks and reporters with grave expressions transforming the pastoral setting into a media spectacle. The story of the 4 missing Miller children, so innocent, so young, began to spread like wildfire across the state, then the nation, touching hearts and igniting a collective sense of horror. The fear within Willow Creek was palpable. Doors that had always been left unlocked were now bolted. Parents clutched their children tighter, their eyes scanning every shadow, every unfamiliar vehicle that passed through town. The comforting blanket of safety had been violently ripped away, replaced by the chilling realization that evil, silent and unseen, could penetrate even the most idyllic of communities. As the hours stretched into the grim reality of a full 24-hour period since the children's disappearance, hope, a fragile thing, began to fray at the edges. Agent Peterson, reviewing the initial findings with Sheriff Jenkins, could find no tangible leads. No witnesses saw anything unusual. No strange vehicles were reported. The only thing they had was the devastating absence of 4 young lives. The profound silence of the woods, once a source of comfort, now seemed to mock them, holding its terrible secrets close. The sun rose again on Sunday, May 22, 1994, but its light brought no comfort, only the stark illumination of their failure. The search continued, relentless and methodical, but with each passing hour, the dreadful certainty grew. The Miller children were not merely lost, they had been taken. The initial investigative efforts, hampered by the suddenness of the event and the overwhelming emotional impact on the community, would soon transition into a long, arduous cold case, a monument to loss that would haunt generations of law enforcement and forever cast a shadow over the green hills of Tennessee. The small town of Willow Creek, once a beacon of rural tranquility, would forever be synonymous with the unimaginable horror of that fateful May morning. The days that followed the disappearance of William, Emily, Thomas, and Lily Miller bled into an agonizing blur of desperate searching, media frenzy, and the chilling realization that the children were truly gone. The initial TBI investigation, led by Agent Mark Peterson, was exhaustive, a meticulously orchestrated symphony of procedural steps designed to leave no stone unturned, yet ultimately yielding only an echoing void. Every inch of the Miller property and the surrounding 20-square-mile radius was systematically combed. Search teams, comprising local volunteers, state park rangers, and specially trained TBI personnel, walked shoulder to shoulder, their eyes sweeping the ground for any anomaly. A discarded piece of clothing, a scuff mark, a bent blade of grass that might signify a struggle. K-9 units, their sensitive noses trained on the scent of the children's clothing, crisscrossed the fields and dense forest, their mournful whines and sudden bursts of frustrated barking only amplifying the growing despair. The creek, normally a tranquil ribbon of water, was dragged and searched by divers, its shallow depths scrutinized for anything that could shed light on the mystery. Every abandoned structure within a 10-mile radius, old barns, dilapidated cabins, forgotten root cellars, was entered, meticulously documented, and cleared. Yet despite these Herculean efforts, not a single piece of credible evidence directly linked to the children or their disappearance was found. It was as if they had simply dematerialized into the thin mountain air. The Miller home itself became a temporary command center, a chaotic hub of activity. Forensic technicians meticulously processed every surface, every object within the house, searching for any foreign fibers, hairs, or fingerprints that might offer a clue. David and Sarah Miller's lives were dissected, their routines scrutinized, their acquaintances interviewed. It was standard procedure, a painful, intrusive necessity in abduction cases, designed to rule out familial involvement and to build a comprehensive profile of the victims and their environment. Both parents cooperated fully, their grief-stricken faces a testament to their agony, their answers consistent, their despair raw and undeniable. Sarah recounted again and again the small details of that morning. The pancakes, Lily's laughter, William's adventurous spirit, the last glimpse of them walking into the woods. David described their lives, their simple joys, their complete incomprehension of why anyone would target their innocent children. The TBI established a tip line, and hundreds of calls poured in, each one meticulously logged and investigated. Sightings, both credible and fantastical, were reported from across Tennessee and even neighboring states. A car matching a vague description was seen in Chattanooga. A group of children resembling the Millers were spotted at a roadside diner in Kentucky. Each lead, no matter how tenuous, was pursued with grim determination, often leading to dead ends, mistaken identities, or cruel hoaxes. The emotional toll on the investigators was immense. Agent Peterson, a man hardened by years of confronting human depravity, found himself haunted by the image of the 4 smiling faces from the missing persons posters that now papered every telephone pole and storefront in Willow Creek. The children's innocence, their potential, made the case particularly excruciating. He understood, with a profound sense of foreboding, that without physical evidence, without a witness, without a confession, this case could very easily slip into the labyrinthine shadows of the unsolved. The first week transitioned into the second, then the third, and the media attention, once a relentless torrent, began to ebb, replaced by other headlines, other tragedies. For Sarah and David Miller, however, the nightmare only intensified. The silence in their once vibrant home was a physical entity, a crushing weight that pressed down on their hearts. The empty chairs at the dinner table, The unwatched cartoons, the unplayed toys, each was a searing reminder of their unbearable loss. Sarah found herself constantly searching, her eyes scanning the horizon, convinced that any moment she would see them emerge from the woods, their clothes dirty, their faces beaming, ready for lunch. David, a man who had always found solace in physical labor, began to wander the property aimlessly, his gaze vacant, his shoulders slumped under an invisible burden. The community, initially united in its support, began to splinter under the strain of prolonged uncertainty. Whispers started, fueled by fear and suspicion. Was it an outsider? Was it someone local, someone hidden in plain sight? Paranoia settled over Willow Creek like a suffocating fog. Neighbors looked at each other with newly guarded eyes. Children were no longer allowed to play unsupervised. The innocence of the town, once its defining characteristic, had been irrevocably shattered. Agent Peterson, despite the dwindling leads, refused to categorize the Miller case as cold. He held daily briefings, reviewing every piece of information, every interview, every discarded theory. He knew that the perpetrator, if still at large, was likely observing, perhaps even participating in the community's grief, a chilling thought that underscored the depravity inherent in such crimes. The absence of a ransom note, the lack of any communication from a presumed abductor, suggested a motive far darker than financial gain. This was a crime of opportunity, a snatch and grab from the very heart of a family, leaving behind only grief and an unanswerable question. The sun continued to rise and set over Willow Creek, marking the relentless passage of time, each day adding another layer of dust to the growing pile of unanswered prayers. The missing persons posters, once vibrant with the hope of return, began to fade in the sun and rain, their edges curling, their messages growing fainter, mirroring the fading hope in the hearts of those who loved. William, Emily, Thomas, and Lily. May turned into June, June into July, and the stifling heat of the Tennessee summer settled over the region, a suffocating blanket that seemed to match the suffocating despair in the Miller household. The children's birthdays passed, each a poignant, unbearable marker of their absence. August brought the start of the new school year, and their classmates, now a year older, returned to empty desks, their youthful exuberance muted by the shadow of the vanished Miller siblings. The initial intense phase of the investigation gradually wound down. TBI agents, their leads exhausted, began to pull back, leaving Sheriff Jenkins and Deputy Thomas to manage the trickle of tips that occasionally came in, mostly from psychics or well-meaning but misguided citizens. The case, though never officially closed, entered the somber realm of the cold case file, a thick binder filled with interviews, photographs, and the haunting specter of 4 lost children. The calendar pages turned with cruel indifference. 1994 gave way to 1995, and then to the new millennium. Sarah and David Miller, their youth stolen by grief, aged visibly, their laughter replaced by a quiet, pervasive sorrow. They never moved from their home, a perpetual shrine to their lost children, forever waiting, forever hoping for a miracle that refused to materialize. The woods, once a symbol of adventure, became a dark, forbidden place, a silent mausoleum of unanswered questions, holding its secrets tighter than ever, ensuring that the cold case of the Miller children remained one of Tennessee's most enduring and heartbreaking mysteries for a very long time. The image of 4 children, smiling brightly in a faded photograph, would become a universal symbol of enduring parental grief, a constant reminder of the day Willow Creek lost its innocence and a family lost its very reason for being. The passage of time, which heals some wounds, only deepened the chasm of their loss, turning it into a monument of sorrow. 25 years, a quarter of a century, the phrase itself carried the weight of generations, the inexorable march of time that had transformed the verdant landscape of Willow Creek and etched new lines of grief and weariness onto the faces of Sarah and David Miller. William, Emily, Thomas, and Lily, if they were alive, would now be in their early 30s, their childhood smiles frozen in the fading photographs that adorned the Millers' mantelpiece. The hope, once a fierce, burning flame, had dwindled to a persistent, flickering ember, kept alive by sheer parental will and the distant promise of justice. Sarah, her once vibrant auburn hair now a soft silver, moved through her days with a quiet grace, but her eyes held a profound sadness that 25 years had failed to erase. David, his strong frame slightly stooped, continued to tend to their farm, his silence often more eloquent than words. Their home remained a shrine, every object a poignant reminder of the children they had lost. The community of Willow Creek, too, had changed. New families had moved in, unaware of the deep scar that ran beneath beneath the town's placid surface. The old general store had closed, replaced by a modern convenience mart. But for those who remembered, for those who had lived through the harrowing days of May 1994, the memory of the missing Miller children remained a raw, unhealed wound. Sheriff Dale Jenkins had long since retired, his tenure ending with the bitter taste of an unsolved case. Deputy Earl Thomas, now Sheriff Thomas, carried the weight of the Miller case like a personal burden. He had been a young man, barely out of the academy, when the children vanished, and the helplessness he felt then had fueled a lifelong dedication to law enforcement, a quiet vow to one day bring answers to the Millers. The cold case file, a voluminous collection of reports, interviews, and outdated forensic analyses, sat in a locked cabinet in his office, a stark reminder of the limitations of 1990s technology. The original TBI investigators had moved on, some retired, some to other departments, their memories of the Miller case often tinged with frustration and a quiet sense of defeat. Agent Mark Peterson, now a respected consultant in cold case methodology, often revisited the Miller file in his own mind, unable to shake the unsettling feeling that a crucial detail had been missed, an obvious truth obscured by the limitations of the time. However, the world of forensic science had undergone a revolutionary transformation in those 25 years. DNA analysis, once a nascent field, had become incredibly sophisticated. Genetic genealogy, a technique that combined DNA profiling with ancestral tracing, offered unprecedented avenues for identifying unknown suspects and victims, even from minute biological samples. It was a game changer, a beacon of hope for cases long deemed unsolvable. In the spring of 2019, a new cold case initiative at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, spearheaded by a fresh-faced, ambitious young forensic anthropologist named Dr. Eleanor Vance, began to systematically review all unsolved abductions and homicides in the state. Dr. Vance, with her sharp intellect and an almost evangelical belief in the power of modern forensics, saw the Miller case as a prime candidate for re-examination. The sheer brutality of the disappearance, the complete lack of physical evidence at the scene, and the profound community impact made it a compelling subject for a fresh look. She requested the original case file, a dusty, imposing stack of binders and evidence logs, which arrived in her lab in Nashville, smelling faintly of age and forgotten despair. Dr. Vance began her meticulous review by focusing on the physical evidence recovered during the initial 1994 search. She knew that even the most painstaking forensic efforts of the 90s would have overlooked trace evidence that modern techniques could now detect and analyze. The original evidence log detailed several items that had been collected from the perimeter of the Miller property, objects deemed insignificant at the time, or samples that were too minute for the technology available. Among these were several envelopes containing soil samples, fragments of unusual fabric, and most crucially, a single, almost microscopic human hair found clinging to a thorny blackberry bush near the edge of the woods where the children were last seen. In 1994, this hair had been dismissed as likely animal fur or an anomaly, too small and degraded for effective analysis. Now, in 2019, armed with advanced mitochondrial DNA sequencing capabilities, Dr. Vance saw a glimmer of possibility. This, she mused aloud to her intern, holding the tiny sealed bag containing the hair, could be our needle in the haystack. The process of extracting mitochondrial DNA from such a degraded sample was painstaking. It involved delicate chemical procedures and highly sensitive amplification techniques. For weeks, Dr. Vance and her team worked tirelessly, their focus absolute. Finally, after numerous attempts, they succeeded in extracting a viable mitochondrial DNA profile. Mitochondrial DNA, unlike nuclear DNA, is inherited solely from the mother, meaning it can trace maternal lineage, but it cannot definitively identify an individual. However, it can exclude individuals, and more importantly, it can connect an unknown sample to a maternal family line. The profile, though limited, was a breakthrough. It belonged to an unknown male. The next step was genetic genealogy. Dr. Vance uploaded the mitochondrial DNA profile to public genealogical databases, hoping for a match with individuals who had voluntarily submitted their DNA for ancestral research. It was a long shot, a search through millions of genetic puzzles, but it was their best hope. The initial search yielded several distant matches, individuals who shared a common maternal ancestor with the unknown donor of the hair. Working backward through family trees, cross-referencing public records, and meticulously constructing genealogical charts, Dr. Vance and her team began to narrow down the potential family lines. It was a slow, deliberate process, like reconstructing a shattered vase, piece by painstaking piece. After months of tireless work, a specific family line emerged, one that had strong ties to Willow Creek and the surrounding areas. And within that family line, one name began to surface with chilling regularity: Wayne Thompson. Wayne Thompson was not a stranger to Willow Creek. He was, in fact, a familiar face, a man who had lived his entire life in the small town. He had been a peripheral figure in the original 1994 investigation, briefly interviewed as a neighbor who had seen nothing unusual. He had even participated in the early search parties, offering his assistance with a quiet, unassuming demeanor. He was a pillar of the community, a deacon at the local church, a respected carpenter, a man whose presence at town functions was as predictable as the changing seasons. The very idea that Wayne Thompson could be connected to such a heinous crime sent a jolt of disbelief through Sheriff Thomas, who had known Thompson his entire life. The man fit none of the typical profiles of a child abductor. He was friendly, unassuming, a picture of small-town respectability. The irony of the situation, the hidden-in-plain-sight common device of true crime narratives, was almost too bitter to contemplate. Yet the genetic genealogy did not lie. Dr. Vance's team presented their findings to Sheriff Thomas and a team of TBI, cold case agents, including a now-retired Agent Peterson, who had been brought back in as an advisor. The evidence, though circumstantial at this stage, was compelling. The hair found near the children's last known location matched a distant maternal relative of Wayne Thompson. It was not a definitive match to Thompson himself, but it placed his maternal family line at the very heart of the mystery. The decision was made to covertly obtain a DNA sample from Wayne Thompson. Under the guise of a community health fair, free flu shots and basic health screenings were offered. Thompson, ever the good citizen, attended, and a routine buccal swab was obtained. The sample was rushed to the TBI lab, where Dr. Vance and her team waited with bated breath. The nuclear DNA analysis, a much more precise and individual-specific test, was performed. The results came back within 48 hours, shattering the quarter-century-old silence of the Miller case with the brutal force of undeniable truth. The nuclear DNA profile from Wayne Thompson's buccal swab was a definitive, unambiguous match to the single human hair found on the blackberry bush near the Miller property in 1994. The probability of it being anyone else was astronomical beyond statistical reason. The hair, once a dismissed anomaly, was now the smoking gun. It meant Wayne Thompson had been at the scene, exactly where the Miller children had disappeared, and given the nature of the crime and the lack of other evidence, it strongly implied his involvement. The news hit Sheriff Thomas with the force of a physical blow. Wayne Thompson, the man he had known, respected, and shared countless cups of coffee with over the years, the man who had expressed his condolences to the Millers year after year, the quiet carpenter, the church deacon. The revelation was a profound betrayal, a chilling testament to the banality of evil. The arrest, when it came, would not only shock Willow Creek to its core, but would also bring a bittersweet, long-delayed surge of hope for justice to Sarah and David Miller, who had spent 25 years living in the shadow of an unbearable question. The passage of time, once an enemy, had finally, through the silent eloquence of forensic science, begun to reveal its terrible, hidden truths. The morning of Wayne Thompson's arrest, September 18, 2019, dawned with a crisp, autumnal chill in Willow Creek, a sharp contrast to the humid, languid air of that fateful May morning in 1994. The trees along Main Street, their leaves just beginning to blush with the nascent colors of fall, shimmered in the early sunlight, casting long, peaceful shadows. But beneath this veneer of rural tranquility, a storm of disbelief and outrage was brewing, poised to erupt. The arrest warrant, meticulously prepared by the TBI and signed by a local judge, was for 4 counts of aggravated kidnapping and 4 counts of felony murder. Sheriff Earl Thomas, his face a mask of grim determination, led the small contingent of TBI agents to Wayne Thompson's modest, well-maintained home, just a few miles down the road from the Miller residence. The house, painted a cheerful yellow with a neatly manicured lawn, seemed to mock the sinister truth that was about to be exposed within its walls. Thompson, a man now in his early 60s, with a receding hairline and a kind, unassuming smile, answered the door in his work clothes, a denim shirt and jeans, as if expecting a delivery or a friendly neighbor stopping by for a chat. His expression, initially one of pleasant inquiry, quickly morphed into confusion, then a dawning horror, as Sheriff Thomas, his voice devoid of any personal familiarity, read him his Miranda rights. Wayne Thompson, you are under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of William, Emily, Thomas, and Lily Miller. The words, delivered with a stark, unyielding finality, seemed to hang in the crisp morning air, shattering the deceptive peace of the street. Thompson's face went ashen. He mumbled something unintelligible, his eyes darting between Sheriff Thomas and the silent, stone-faced TBI agents. He offered offered no resistance as he was handcuffed, his hands, once skilled in carpentry, now bound by the cold steel of justice. As he was led to the unmarked police vehicle, a neighbor, out walking his dog, paused, his jaw dropping in stunned disbelief at the sight of Wayne Thompson, the quiet deacon, being arrested. Within minutes, the news, initially a ripple of whispers, began to spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. The small town, which had carried the collective grief of the Miller children's disappearance for a quarter century, was now reeling from a shock of an entirely different magnitude. Wayne Thompson. The name resonated with familiarity, with trust, with community. He was the man who had helped repair the church roof after a storm. He had brought meals to the Millers in the agonizing weeks after the children vanished. He had been a comforting, constant presence, seemingly sharing in their sorrow. The betrayal was profound, a knife plunged into the very heart of their trust. The arrest sent shockwaves far beyond Willow Creek, reigniting national interest in the long, cold case. News vans, once a familiar sight in the summer of 1994, descended upon the quiet town once more, their satellite dishes pointing skyward, ready to broadcast the sensational developments. Reporters clamored for details, their microphones thrust at stunned residents, many of whom could only shake their heads in disbelief, their voices choked with emotion. Sarah and David Miller received the news in a phone call from Sheriff Thomas himself. Sarah, her hand trembling so violently she almost dropped the receiver, listened as Sheriff Thomas, his voice thick with emotion, delivered the words they had waited 25 years to hear. "Mrs. Miller, we have made an arrest in your children's case. Wayne Thompson." A strangled cry escaped Sarah's lips, a sound of profound relief mingled with an overwhelming, gut-wrenching pain. David, his arm around her, held her close as she wept, tears of sorrow, and finally, a fragile flicker of hope streaming down her face. The news was a bittersweet balm, a confirmation that their long vigil might finally yield answers, but it also reopened the old, unbearable wound of their loss. The initial relief gave way to a harrowing question. Where were their children? The search for the truth, for the bodies of William, Emily, Thomas, and Lily, now began in earnest, focused relentlessly on Wayne Thompson. Wayne Thompson, now confined to a sterile interview room at the TBI regional headquarters, initially maintained a steadfast facade of bewildered innocence. He demanded a lawyer, offered protests of his faith, and repeated with a maddening calm that he knew nothing of the Miller children's disappearance, claiming the DNA evidence must be a mistake, a contamination, a technical error. Agent Peterson, brought in specifically for his experience in high-stakes interrogations, sat across from him, his demeanor calm, authoritative, and utterly relentless. Peterson did not employ theatrics. He relied on the irrefutable data provided by Dr. Vance and the mounting psychological pressure of Thompson's own guilt, hidden for a quarter century. "Mr. Thompson," Peterson stated, his voice low and even, "we know you were there. We have your DNA. The hair found on the blackberry bush near where the children vanished belongs to you. We've talked to your family, Wayne. We know about your movements that day. We know you drove your truck, a dark blue Ford Ranger, down that old service road and parked near the property line. We know you saw those 4 beautiful, innocent children playing near the woods. We know you did this." The sustained pressure, the precise mention of details only the perpetrator could know, such as the specific color of his long-soled truck and the precise location of the hair, began to erode Thompson's composure. The veneer of the respected deacon began to crack, revealing the terrified, isolated predator underneath. The solemn, empathetic tone of the investigators, who focused not on judgment but on the possibility of giving the Millers closure, slowly wore him down. Thompson, a man who had internalized his horrific secret for so long, began to exhibit classic signs of confession readiness, shifting eye contact, shallow breathing, and a sudden, profound slump in his posture. He asked for a glass of water, a simple gesture that marked his complete surrender. When he spoke, his voice was a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of a truth long suppressed finally forcing its way into the light. He began with a series of vague, self-pitying justifications, portraying the act as a momentary lapse, a terrible mistake, but Peterson expertly steered him back to the undeniable facts, the precise timeline of May 21st, 1994. The confession, recorded meticulously, was chilling in its casual brutality. Thompson admitted that he had been driving down the old logging road, cutting through to a carpentry job, when he saw the 4 children playing near the tree line, unsupervised. He said it was an opportunistic impulse, a sudden, dark compulsion that overwhelmed his senses. He lured the children away from the perimeter, promising them a sight of a hidden bird's nest, an offer William, the inquisitive 7-year-old, could not refuse. Once they were deep within the dense woods, out of sight of the Miller home, the nature of his horrific crime became brutally clear. He confessed to the subsequent agonizing details of their deaths, details which, in their tragic finality, could only be shared with the grieving parents in the most controlled and sensitive manner, but which gave the investigators the full, unvarnished truth of that terrible afternoon. The confession, while confirming the worst of the Millers' fears, finally provided the one thing they desperately needed: the location of their children. Thompson led the TBI and Sheriff Thomas back to the woods, not far from the original search zone, but in an area so dense with undergrowth and so close to the forbidden old well that it had been easily overlooked despite the meticulous initial effort. The weather, which had played such an atmospheric role in the beginning, now provided a somber reflection of the mood. A cold, driving rain began to fall as the search teams, now armed with the killer's precise directions, worked to excavate the scene. The recovery operation was slow, methodical, and heartbreaking, transforming the final piece of the Miller farm into a temporary, dignified memorial site. The presence of the remains, 25 years after their disappearance, delivered the definitive, albeit devastating closure Sarah and David had been denied for so long. The trial of Wayne Thompson, a somber and highly publicized event, took place 10 months later in the county courthouse, just miles from Willow Creek. Sarah and David Miller sat in the front row every day, their faces etched with the cumulative pain of their ordeal, but now bolstered by a quiet, resolute strength. The prosecution, relying heavily on the definitive DNA evidence provided by Dr. Vance and the meticulous, detailed confession, presented an overwhelming case. The defense offered a brief, futile argument of diminished capacity, but the jury, composed of local citizens who had lived with the shadow of the cold case for decades, returned a guilty verdict on all counts after only 3 hours of deliberation. Wayne Thompson was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Justice, a cold, hard, and uncompromising entity, had finally been served, 25 years too late for William, Emily, Thomas, and Lily, but on time for their parents. The resolution, however, was bittersweet. The pain of their loss remained, a permanent fixture in the Millers' lives, but the haunting uncertainty, the gnawing question of what happened, had been answered. In the quiet aftermath, Sarah and David established the Miller Children's Foundation, dedicated to funding cold case investigations using modern forensic genealogy, ensuring that the tragedy that consumed their lives could serve as a catalyst for hope for other families trapped in the agonizing limbo of the unsolved. The Miller farm, no longer a monument to unanswered questions but a dignified resting place, stood as a testament to the devastating irony that the greatest evil can often hide in the most unassuming places. A quiet neighbor who participated in the search for the children he had killed. The long descriptive passages of time and grief now yielded to a final, albeit melancholic, resolution, a painful truth purchased at the cost of 4 innocent lives, a permanent scar on the memory of Willow Creek, Tennessee, a place forever marked by the day its fragile equilibrium was shattered, only to be partially restored a quarter-century later by the silent, powerful science of DNA. The memory of William, Emily, Thomas, and Lily Miller, now freed from the cruel ambiguity of the missing persons file, settled into the solemn comfort of remembrance, their story a haunting echo of lost innocence and the relentless pursuit of forensic salvation.